The widely accepted definition of pay equity refers to equal pay for equal or comparable work. The words "or comparable" are very important. Pay equity means more than just the same pay for men and women doing the same job. Pay equity also involves the proper valuing of female-dominated professions and the appropriate rewarding of these professions.
One of the key points put forward by union representatives to the Senate inquiry was the need to broaden the notion of pay equity to address why women are being paid less for doing jobs requiring similar or equivalent skill sets to their male counterparts in different positions and across different industries.
The way the system has worked so far, and unfortunately still does, is it relies on the legislation to provide remedies for people once they discover that they are unequally paid. But we know that a lot of unequal pay is from one industry versus another. So it might be aged care workers or childcare workers being underpaid compared to other perhaps male-dominated areas that do use the same skill set but are paid more. And so to expect an individual woman worker to know how she relates in terms of her sets of skills and the requirements of her job in terms of the pay, how that relates to, say, engineers or construction work is just unrealistic. And where the Fair Work Act has improved the capacity to remedy the unequal pay, it still leaves an individual woman, or perhaps her union if she's in the union, to go and discover how she is paid relative to other areas or other industries, or perhaps compared to whoever she works with in that same company who is a man and is paid more. We were saying that while the Fair Work Act has improved things a lot in terms of remedying the problem, what we need now is for the government to set up agencies which are far more proactive in terms of uncovering pay equity, because you cannot expect an individual person to get there on their own.
We need to look at outcomes, and we need to be able to understand that we've got to measure outcomes beyond something physical like a product or a number of hours fixing something or teaching someone. We need to look at what other possible outcomes exist. Are they psychological? Are they intellectual? Are they something that contributes to society? And we need to understand that those things are also valid. And I think that we have a range of ways now of doing that, but certainly not enough. We've got skills audits, we've got pay audits. What else do we need to do, and how else can we measure worth? And that's myself then trying to ask the question again that I'm trying to answer. And I think that's indicative of the problem, that we are kind of talking around in circles, and we need to move forward and set down in concrete some ways of measuring these things.
The gender pay gap in our industry is a crime. If any companies in this country could afford, like that, to fix gender pay gap, it is Australian banks. And the fact that, for example, the National Australia Bank entered into a pay equity audit with us. It was a lot of work, but, it ends up being beached on things like confidentiality about what people get paid. And, and they appear before the House of Reps committee and say, after doing that, we actually don't think there's an institutionalised gender pay gap. Now, that is just complete and utter nonsense.
As well as the need to quantify pay differences for men and women performing equivalent duties, is the need to address the underlying cultural assumptions about gender and the workplace.
Women tend to work where it's more flexible for them to be able to do childcare, have childcare relationships, or where there's a possibility that they could come back on a casual basis because that's going to work in around their ability to take some leave here and there. And also because they have access to them. They might be closer to home, all those sorts of things. But there's a lot, and also because they're industries that are seen as you said, a cultural thing. That's a traditional area where women work.
Another problem too is one that we see in the caring professions in areas like social work, social services, youth work, where employers expect that people have come to this industry because they care. In your interview they'll say, why do you want to work in this industry? And inevitably people will talk about, I want to give back. And it's that giving back that's exploited. Because it's expected this person cares, they're here because they want to be there, they'll put in the extra hours, they'll do the extra labour, often unpaid, often uncompensated, and often, again, female-dominated industries. So there again, we see how pay equity is definitely a problem in that industry. There are definitely stereotypes about the sorts of industries that women should be working in, or that women could be working in, or where women should go after they are coming back out of time off for maternity leave or time off for study or whatever else. And obviously there are women that predominate in certain industries, but I also believe that we need to challenge that. We need to be encouraging and supporting and motivating women to get into those industries that are seen as non-traditional industries for women, and certainly the other way around as well. I think that equality is something that's obviously going to benefit both genders, so we need to channel these ideas about change to both genders so that we can have more balance in the workplace.
Another key issue raised at the inquiry was paid maternity leave and the need to address the loss of income and employment opportunities suffered by mothers and other primary caregivers.
Where issues like paid maternity leave and the right to return to work part-time are very important because they keep women in jobs and assist in, spreading out their income capacity over those years.
The NATSEM report that came out last week that talked about women earning over a lifetime, in some instances more than $1 million less, that the area where that is the most predominant is women who are in child rearing years. So it's logical that we need to seek more protection for all parents, not just women, but all parents who wish to try and combine work and family, because that is the time when you're, you tend to go part-time or you need to have to work flexibly and of course your income suffers as a result of that.
If you're not offering paid maternity leave and you're not offering flexible or part-time work arrangements for all of your employees, then you're effectively excluding people who are making choices about having kids, which for the most part is still the women in the workforce.
One of the arguments that I've heard against paid maternity leave is quite simply, if you want to have a child, that's your business, you pay for it. I don't believe that's the case. We live in a society as workers, we participate in a society and we participate in an economy. And I think it's essential that women are not disadvantaged by having children to be able to participate fully. And I think it's important that we realise that what women are doing as primary caregivers are transferring skills to their children as well. And that then in turn feeds into the community and feeds into society. It's not something that happens in a microcosm in the home where you've decided to have a child, therefore it's your business, your issue, you raise that child in the home. No, it's part of community, it's part of society, and for women who are working, it's part of workplaces as well.
I suppose a good example would be to introduce, finally, after 40 years of fighting in this country, a national government paid maternity leave scheme. Some women will drop out of the workforce to care for family members, and they'll also be dropping out of the workforce to have their children. And if they're on unpaid maternity leave for, say, 12 months, that's a substantial chunk of their super that they're not contributing to, and the employer is actually saving, so that there's no contributions going in. So if we had a national paid maternity leave scheme in this country, which would be recognised as normal time, women wouldn't be so disadvantaged and they would be retiring with a lot more money than what they would have envisioned without having a paid maternity leave scheme. Australia and the United States are two of the only of the OECD countries that don't have a national paid maternity leave scheme, and it's an actual national shame that this government has to put this in the 2009 federal budget to look after families and to look after working women.
Another area being looked at is increased protection for part-time and minimum wage jobs, where a disproportionate number of women workers are represented.
There's a superannuation guarantee threshold of $450. So if you're not earning that much per fortnight, then your employer's not obliged to put any super in. So if you're working casually or part-time, 2 or 3 jobs, but unless one of those jobs actually pays more than $450 a fortnight, you're not getting any super. So what we're calling for is a restructure of the way super is taxed so that people who are earning less than $450 per fortnight can still put into their super accounts.
People who are on the minimum wage are rarely represented by unions, and unions are the ones that fight for improvements in conditions and wages, and they get filtered out to everybody else who's covered by collective agreements. But the minimum wage is only ever going to take you up to the next level of the minimum, and we want those people who are on minimum wage to say, well, why is that industry deemed to be minimum wage? Is it only because it's a traditional area that women are working in? Because if that's the case, then that's wrong. And let's look at all of the different types of industries that people work in, whether they're men or women, and say, well, is this job more valuable than that job? Is this skill more valuable than that job? And if it's not, then we should be paying for it.